Hi, everyone. This is Kate Klingensmith here with Bob Manning. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Parent Gauge staff training. My role here as product manager at NHSA is I get to work directly with everyone using the system, so whether that's your program administrator or you all directly. And I get to learn how things are going, how we can be improving things. I work with our tech support team as well as our software developers so that we're constantly trying to improve Parent Gauge. So those of you who have been using the system in previous years, you might have logged in already this year and noticed that, for example, it looks different. So today is going to be only the second time I've done the training on the system with improved navigation and usability. So I'm always here to help. I focus more on strategic implementation, but if you ever have any questions, you can always contact us using our tech support form, which I'll show you how to access. And we also have an email address, parentgauge@nhsa.org. So let me just start off from the 40,000-foot view. Parent Gauge is a system that guides you through a conversation with the families that you're serving. So this is intended to be used once or twice or even 3 times a year. And it's a guided conversation that includes 10 open-ended questions and about 35 to 45 closed-ended questions, which mean these are agreement statements essentially on a scale of 1 to 5 from, I don't agree with that statement at all, up to very much. This conversation, each time you speak with your family, should take about 20 to 30 minutes. And it can be done over the phone or in person. It can also be conducted on any device that connects to the internet. It's a web-based tool, so it's a website that you log into, so you can use your computer, laptop, tablet, or even cell phone to do this. And it's formative. So what you're going to see over time is that you're asking families the same questions over and over again. Now, what we're doing with this is learning, okay, if we see that 75% of our families are reading to their child every day, but 25% aren't, is there any way for us to bump up that number? Is there any way for us to improve that average score to make sure that our families are establishing healthy, educational habits? So there are 2 versions of Parent Gauge. When I show you how to create an interview, you'll see a label called evaluation, and you can select either initial, mid-year, or post. The initial Parent Gauge conversation will really be focusing on how families are doing. This is establishing a baseline. So, for example, we have access to regular medical care, or, we have daily routines. Now, when we move into the mid-year and the post interviews, we're going to be asking the families, as you saw in the examples that Bob showed, we're going to ask them questions not only like, how are you feeling about this, but how is the program supporting you in doing this? So I'll walk you through many of these question sets to point out the difference between the phrasing and those coupleted questions. Now, in terms of the system itself, I know that I do have some administrators on the call here, but I'm going to talk mostly about the staff role today. There are program administrators at the highest level who, for example, they're the ones setting up the system for you. They're the ones who may be delegating center administrator rights, and maybe the ones who are creating your accounts for you as well. Now, you as a family advocate, family service worker, home visitor, or teacher who are actually conducting the interviews, there are 3 really important things that you're going to be doing with Parent Gauge. One is going to be managing your rosters. So reviewing the records of your children and their guardians before you conduct the interview to make sure that all of their information is accurate and up to date. Of course, you'll be conducting the interviews. And then you'll have access to view aggregate data. And just one caveat is that when your account is created by your administrator, you are assigned to either one center or a few centers. And you'll only be able to access the interviews and the data from those centers that you were given permission to. So that's something really important about Parent Gauge is sort of we have these what we call walled gardens where you only really see what you need to see. but it is great that you have access to the aggregate data at your centers so that you can, go in and look around and see is there a difference between the results that the families with children who are, age 0 to 2, are they responding differently than my families who are aged 3 to 5? My English-speaking families versus my Spanish-speaking families, is there a significant difference between how they're, responding to the program? So I'll show you how to do all of that when we jump into the system here in a minute. Just so you know, one frequent tech support request is, whoops, I accidentally created a duplicate. So whether that's a child or a guardian or an interview, only your administrators have access to delete those records. So if you contact tech support, we'll point you to the right person who would be able to manage that for you. And again, your administrators are the ones who set up the system and create your accounts. One note is that I will be sending you out all of these materials from the ParentGauge email address so that you'll have that. So I just wanted to make this comprehensive in terms of, giving you the URL and also, all of the information that you'd need. I'm going to skip through many of the slides in this presentation just because I'm going to show you live in our demo environment. But you will have this information for you in your inbox later today. So if you haven't already gotten an account, you'll receive an email from us today. And if you don't know how to access ParentGauge or your password isn't working or something like that, you can respond and we'll get you set up. All right, so I'm about to log in again to our demo site. It's important for you to know that all of these names and all of the data that you see are made up. So again, we hold private information really tightly and we'll never share names. And in fact, if we ever have a tech support question for you, all of that communication back and forth is encrypted. All right, so again, for those of you who have been using ParentGauge in previous years, you'll notice everything looks a little bit different, but it's actually easier to use now. So this is the login screen, and one really important thing to note, especially if you're only probably going to use ParentGauge once every couple months. So it's easy to forget a password. So there's always a link here that you can click, and this will send your new temporary password to the email address with which you're registered and which is your login username. So I'm going to go ahead and log in right now as my demo user. And we're now in the system. Okay, so one thing I want to point out is that we've tried to make it very clear every time you log into ParentGauge, sort of what is important to do and in what order. So first off, we have managing rosters. So for all of you, you're going to be able to see the staff members who have access to the same centers that you do. It basically is a list of email addresses. You'll have your rosters of your children and your guardians. So the very first thing before you conduct an interview is to go and find that guardian on the roster, review their record, find the child about whom you'll be speaking, make sure that their record is up to date, and then you'll go ahead and conduct your interviews. You have access to the entire interview list, which is actually a really helpful portal for you to do your workload management. So I'll show you how to use the filters on there so you can find maybe, for example, only your incomplete interviews. So just before we jump into that workflow, I want to point out a few other additional tools within ParentGauge that might help you get started, and it's called Help. Again, for those of you who used the system maybe last year, this is now where the guide content exists over here. And let me just walk you through a few of the resources available that might be helpful. Of course, we have our frequently asked questions. That's just sort of like, how do I do X, Y, or Z? How do I create a new record for a child, or how do I create an interview? But I want to point out a few additional resources that we've been adding over time based on feedback from folks using the system. So the first one is going to be this Interviewing Skills for Excellence. Actually, I already have it pulled up because sometimes it doesn't load. But this is a YouTube video featuring one of the graduate research assistants who helped develop ParentGauge and run a lot of the pilot interviews. And he's actually running through part of an interview with a real Head Start mother here on the right. He pauses every once in a while to give tips and tricks and best practice advice in terms of actually having this conversation. So you'll notice right here, in-person interviews right now are probably not common, but if you're sitting in a room with a guardian, it's really a good idea, for example, to sit side by side with them so that they can see your computer screen so that they know what is being recorded and they don't feel uncomfortable that we're grading them in any kind of a way. So it's completely transparent and they know that we're just recording their answers. And, maybe they're visual and want to read the questions themselves instead of just hearing them out loud. And then, they get a visual reminder of the answer choices as well. So this video would be really helpful if you're brand new at conducting ParentGauge interviews. So we have both a partial interview in English and we also have a partial interview in Spanish later on in this video. So that's a really good, helpful tool. It's about 1 hour long that I would highly recommend you use. Now, going back into the help section, we also have a really helpful tool, printing interview questionnaires. So this is going to give you blank templates of the interviews, so both in English and Spanish, the initial, the beginning of the year interview template, and then the mid and post, which again are identical to each other. And this is going to give you a extremely generic interview form that can be used with anyone. And it gives you space to record the open-ended question responses and also gives you not only every single question, but also the logic for the questions. So depending on a few conditions of where the child is in the program or if they have a disability, there are some conditional questions here. So you'll notice these instructions only ask the next two questions if the child is moving on from early Head Start to Head Start or from Head Start to kindergarten. When you look at the interview itself digitally that you've created within ParentGauge, you don't have to worry about that logic. It's going to be generated automatically based on the demographics of the child. But just so you know, if you are doing home visits and you're having this conversation in person, this is a handy tool if you just want to print out a few copies to carry in case the family doesn't have Wi-Fi or cell phone signal. So again, that's found in the help section, and that is the printing interview questionnaires. Now, the next tool we have here is a visual response skill. So this is going to allow you, and this was based on feedback from many people saying, the closed-ended questions, having to repeat the answer choices every time, there are 5 of them, again, from not at all to very much, just gets a little old. And sometimes, let's say that we're speaking with a family not in their native language, but maybe they're English as a second language. This visual response skill allows them to sort of understand the different choices and what they mean. So again, all the way from not at all to very much. So we have that available in the help section in English and in Spanish. Okay, so before I forget, because I usually leave this off and I've mentioned it already, if you have any questions or need any tech support, this contact button here is going to take you to a form. As much information as you can provide is very helpful to us. So, if somebody says, I deleted a guardian, we would probably, we need to know which program you're in, if you have the name of the guardian, if you have a question about, I clicked on this thing and it didn't work, like which page were you on, for example. So we try to gather as much information as possible so we can solve your problems as easily as and quickly as we can. Okay, so getting back into ParentGauge, I'm going to go back to the home page. Now, these, just so you know, we wanted to lay out this workflow so that it was very intuitive, but there are redundant links, if you will. So, for example, here, rosters, interviews, progress, these are all duplicated up here. We've got our rosters, our interviews, and our reports up here as well. So let's start off with looking at the rosters. The first quick and easy one is staff. Again, this is just a list of the staff members who are also part of the center or centers that you are. And just in case you want to contact anybody, you have their email addresses. Now, what you're going to find on all of these lists are filters on the left side. And then we also have a download on the right side here. And this allows you to print out an Excel spreadsheet of this list. So more interestingly, let's go into our children and guardians. Now, just for your understanding, this roster may be pre-populated for you. Now, that will happen one of two ways. Either your administrators have uploaded the rosters directly from Child Plus, or they are creating the records manually, or I guess a third option is they're asking you to create these records. So just looking at this list really fast, and then I'll show you how to create a new record. Again, we have filters over here on the left so that you can quickly find a child by name. Let me go ahead and find some completed interviews. By the way, this data is very old, so I'm going to go back down to 2017 and 18. Let's see. Oh, I actually want to do mid-year. There we go, and I'm going to filter this list. Oh, well, that was a bad filter. Let me see if I have any incomplete. Let me see. In progress. All right. So now I'm looking at a list of the children who had interviews that were either, created and not finished or created and not even started. And if I click on one of these child records, I can see all of the demographic information that we have about this child. And I also have access to the interviews that we've held with his guardians. So these are actual hyperlinks that could take you straight to their historical interview forms. Now, you can edit a child that already exists in the system. Again, when we talk about roster management, you may want to always check to make sure that everything is up to date. Is the child assigned to the right center? Have we learned new information about them? So, for example, oh yeah, well, yes, they are Hispanic or Latino, or they've actually moved on from early Head Start into Head Start, or yes, they actually were diagnosed with a disability this past year, so we want to fill that in. Now, these records, there are only a few required fields, and I'll show you on a blank form what those are. But these last two questions are critical for you all to review because this information, if your program is using the Child Plus import, this data does not come in through that import. And these two questions actually affect the question set. As you saw, those are the conditional types of questions. So we really need to make sure every round of interviews that we have everything here up to date. So I'm going to go back to my children roster. So again, I can find a child by name. I can find a child just, look at just one center. By default, this list is going to show you your active children. If a child has moved on from your program, you may go and edit their record and mark them as inactive. And what that does is it retains their historical data for you to see. Again, you all don't have the ability to delete records, but that's good because at this point in the system, if a record is deleted, for example, a kid has moved on to kindergarten, if we delete them, just for privacy purposes right now, that all of their historical interviews will also be wiped from your view. But, we generally want to retain that data so that data can be folded into year-over-year reports. So again, you can filter this list, you can download an Excel spreadsheet of this, and here's how you create a record for a new child. Very simple form here. Only a few required fields. So we've got, at which center is the child enrolled. We need their first and last name. And then we need their program type, Head Start, early Head Start, maybe a mixture, migrant, seasonal. Are we serving them in the center, home-based, or some other situation? And then again, these four last questions, these last two being critical in terms of forming the question set that's relevant to that child. So really simple, probably takes about 1 minute or two. All of these additional demographic data points are only to help slice and dice the data from across the program. So for example, as I gave an example before, if you wanted to look at if the families of 0 to 2-year-olds are responding on average differently than your families of 3 to 5-year-olds, birth date would be important. Okay, so now I will show you the guardian roster. It looks almost identical to the child roster. Guardian name, you can search by the name, by the interview status, by centers, or by their child. Now, the association between a guardian and a child, you may notice on the form to create a new record that there is an optional field where you can make this association here. That is not necessary. You can do this, but also that association is really formalized upon the creation of the interview. So, for example, I'm going to go back to the roster. If I wanted to click on someone who didn't have a child assigned, Amanda Billings, well, as soon as I create an interview for Amanda Billings, it'd be required for me to enter in the child about whom we're speaking. And so at that point, she'd end up having a child associated here, and she'd end up having an interview associated here as well. So additionally, if you are going to talk to a guardian and you're interested in maybe their historical interviews, so to get some context and background, you can either find their old interview here. So I'm just trying to get to a place where I can find one that's been at least in progress. So if I click on the guardian's name, if I knew I was going to talk to Edmundo next week and I wanted to look back at his interview from last year, for example, I can always go to his record here and click on that interview, and I can review all of the responses from that interview. So those are your rosters and how to use them. Now let's really dig into the interviews. So 2 things here with the interviews. I'm actually just going to take you home since that's probably where you'll all launch out of. You can, again, access your interview list here or create a new interview here. Similarly, same links are down here. So let's look at the interview list. This is probably where you're going to be doing sort of the management of, who we've spoken with and who we still need to speak to. So we have each and every interview represented. You can click on any one of these and it takes you directly to that interview form. Or more easily for you to navigate is using these filters. So if I wanted to, for example, only look up my interviews that were incomplete for this year, for example, I can stack these filters up. So I could go in and I could say I want to find incomplete interviews. I just happen to know this data is old. And then one thing to note is there are more filters on this page than you can see on the screen. So you would hover your mouse over this side of the screen and scroll down, and then you can actually enter, for example, maybe just your name. So I only want to see the interviews that, I've created or I've been assigned. So I'm going to go ahead and say, me as demo user, I want to find all my incomplete interviews. Maybe I want to focus on just one of my centers. If I want to just find an interview that I know I conducted with one specific guardian, I could. And I can add as many of these filters as I want. And here, instead of seeing, about 20 interviews, I'm seeing 30. Oh, that's because I changed the date range. So I'm going to reset this and show the whole data set. Reset this date. So in the system right now, for the centers that I have access to, each page has 10 interviews, so this is about 220 interviews. But again, if I wanted to go in and find just my incomplete, assigned to me, or the ones that I have created but not completed yet, now you'll see I only have about 30 of these. So that's one really easy way to use this. And again, you can download this spreadsheet. The download will only provide you with lines for each interview that appear on the screen as it stands right now. So if you apply the filters and then download the spreadsheet, you're only going to get what came out with that filter. Okay, so now let's jump into a brand new interview. I'm going to go ahead, click Create Interview here, or from this up at the top, you can create an interview. So you could do that either from the list, from the home page, or from this drop-down menu. So I first need to say at which center the child is enrolled. One big piece of advice, and this is, follow the guidance of your administrators, but we have a common question about what if a family has multiple children? Do we complete parent gauge multiple times with that same guardian? Again, it depends on the guidance from, your leadership, but what we recommend is that if a family has 2 children at the same center, you really only need to talk to them once. Their responses probably aren't going to be very different from child to child. So you would want to pick the child who maybe if they have a special condition like they're aging out, this is their last year, then you'd have those specific questions for them. Or if they have a disability, you'd want to pick the child in the family that has the disability so we can learn about how the family is understanding that. But if a family has children in multiple centers, so maybe they have one early Head Start, let's call that child A, and then child B is in Head Start, you actually would want to complete parent gauge twice for that family because they could have significantly different opinions on the support that they're receiving from the different programs. But each interview can only be assigned to one guardian and one child. So the cool thing is that once you pick a center, you're only going to be able to select a guardian from that center. So you'll have an automatic suggested drop-down list from which you can pick a guardian. Same thing with the students. These are only going to be the students that are enrolled in this specific center. So to create this interview, that's all you need. You need a center, guardian, a child. You want to enter in the date of the interview. The evaluation, again, this is critical. If you select initial, that's not going to ask you all of the questions. The mid-year and the post have the complete question set with the questions focused on both the parents and the program. And then the mode in which we are speaking over the phone or in person, and then in which language. And that's it. So it takes about, 45 seconds to create a new interview, and we now have our interview form. So let's go through some of the features, and then we'll go through some of the questions. First of all, we have the print option. This is going to generate a PDF of this interview, whether it's blank or whether it's completed. And then if it's completed, you will actually find all of the answers already filled in. So, for example, if you want to print out the interview after the fact and stick it in a file or something like that, then this is a good option. So I'll show you really quickly. Right now you'll notice, this is the opening question, the response is blank. This was a bug that we had in the system until this year, but if I all of a sudden have a response in here, I'm going to click next because that's sort of like a save button. Then I go to print this out, you'll now see that this response is right here, even though I just recorded it. So again, you can print this out at blank to be used on the spot, or you could print this out after the fact. Now, immediately under that, we have language options. So parent gauge can be translated from English by default into Spanish, French, and Arabic. So what that means, and I'll show you this on another page, this is going to be all of the natural language prompting, the questions, the question choices. The only thing it won't translate is anything you've typed into the open-ended question boxes. Whatever language you're typing into that, it'll stick that way. But we do have the option to translate on the fly on every page between English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. Now, you may be wondering, this is a common question, edit interview. People are thinking that this button has to do with I need to update my answers, like maybe I actually wanted to put something else in this box. You can do that without clicking that edit button. So I can always change this. The edit button up here is to edit the details of the interview. So if I click edit, for example, maybe I planned on speaking with Mr. Jones on October 26th, but I didn't get a chance to do that, and now I'm going to be speaking with him on January 10th. That is the type of information that you can change by clicking that edit button. Maybe we actually have the opportunity to meet in person, so I'm going to select that. And then that'll update that demographic information here at the top. On every page, excuse me, you also have this mark complete, but at the very end of the interview, you have this button as well. And again, that'll just update the status on the interview list to help you if you want to filter for complete versus incomplete. Now, you have the ability to record audio. This works on laptops and tablets. It does not work on a cell phone. It's not working on my computer because my operating system is very out of date. But you have usually a little microphone button right here that you can click and record, of course, given the family's permission to do so. And also something cool is that this section appears on every single page. So what we found some people doing, they'll ask the open-ended question. There's an open-ended question at the end of every section. So they may just want to record the answer to that because it's going to be a little bit more storytelling and, long and thought out responses. So you can actually record and then stop recording, move on to the next section, and then hit record again at the end of that section. If you want, you can attach as many audio files to this interview as you'd like. Now, if you are using a cell phone, for example, you could do, I think, my app on my phone is like voice memos or something. I could even use a different device to make an audio recording, email that to myself, and upload it here, and it would be attached to this interview. Okay, I am going to pause before we get into the questions in the conversation because I have some questions in the question box. So, first off, if a family is enrolled in both Early Head Start and Head Start, would you select the option for both? In that case, you would have records for each child, and they would each, be indicated. One would be Early Head Start, one would be Head Start. And then the interview form doesn't require that information. You would just select the center. So each interview would represent each of those types of programs. So I hope that answers your question. If a family is enrolled. Okay, so this was specifically about adding or editing a child's record. The child usually is either in one or the other, but there is the option that combines. So when you create a child, it has Head Start, Early Head Start, Head Start/Early Head Start, and then migrant or seasonal. The next question. When children transfer from one home visitor to another, can you transfer all of that information from one account to another, or do you start from scratch as if it is a new child? If that home visitor is assigned to the same center, then they'll just have access to that original record. Now, what happens when a child moves centers? Your program administrator may see two records for that child. If their record is updated, so they were at Center 1 and now they're at Center 2, they'll still appear on Center 1's roster just so that center has that historical data, but they will also appear on the Center number 2's roster, and it'll look like a blank slate. Okay, good question. So next up, thank you, Stephanie. Is there a reason why you might only see the answers to the closed-ended questions and not the open-ended questions when you print a completed survey? That was a bug that we fixed this past fall. So from now on, every time you print out a completed interview, you will see every single response, including the open-ended question responses. And then the last open question here is, for a virtual interview, what is the best way to get good audio quality? That is a very good question, Lisa. We've had this a lot, if I'm on the phone with a family, maybe you're going to be using your cell phone, so you have no way to actually audio record. Many computers have a way to record audio, but if you're, for example, if you have a landline, you could, contact the family on your landline and then use your cell phone to record the audio. If you use speakerphone and then have your phone there recording. But it's just going to take a little bit of experimentation based on your own individual setup. And again, we always need to get permission from the families if we're going to record the audio. Okay, so those were all really great questions, and, keep them coming. I'm probably going to leave, I have two more, sorry. If you record open-ended question or answers, do you need to type in the answer for reports? I would still highly recommend that you enter in a summary. So these open-ended questions, they do not need to be, recording verbatim responses. What we're going to be looking for here are just bullet points. So what we're trying to pinpoint here are highlights, like what's going really well for the family. What are some areas for improvement? If they say, this didn't go so well, or I don't feel great about X, Y, or Z. But yes, I would still record those, because I'll show you at the end of this how you can print out the collection of all of those open-ended question responses. Okay, last question before we jump into the interview. Can you edit a guardian? So, for example, if a child enrolled later is placed in foster care. I'm not exactly sure if that means that they would have a new guardian, but in this specific case, I would recommend that you, create a record for whomever you're going to be speaking with about that child next. So a child could be associated with multiple guardians, as a guardian could be associated with multiple children. It's only the interview that allows only one child and one guardian, but a child could have multiple guardians on their record, as a guardian could have multiple children. Okay, really, really good questions. Okay, but let's get started. So you are now either on the phone with someone's aunt or sitting in person with someone's father. We have a lot of natural language for you to read to make this conversation flow smoothly. I'm sure after a number of interviews, you're going to know what to say, but we've given you just sort of like introductions to each section to help you introduce the concepts, what are we discussing and what are the answer choices, et cetera, with the families. So we just start off simply with, thank you for agreeing to participate in this interview. I'm interested in learning about your and your child's experience with our program. I'll ask you questions about starting at the program, your relationship with your child, your role in your child's education, your family's health and well-being. What we're doing is laying out the sort of sectioning off of the types of questions we'll be asking them. And of course, we always, say, do you have any questions before we begin? As I mentioned before, this is aligned with the PSCE framework. So we've got our opening question, which is just fairly vague and broad. So, all right, let's get started. Tell me about your experiences so far with Head Start. Tell me about how the program has helped you and your family. Now, you can leave it at that and start to hear stories, start to hear thoughts coming out. But if you're not getting much feedback, then there's always a secondary prompt for these questions. So let's say a family just says, things have been good. Okay, well, can you tell me about what the staff did to get to know you and your family? So you can always go to these secondary prompts to sort of dig a little bit deeper in each of these areas. And again, don't worry about taking notes verbatim. If there is a special quote that you want to record, that's great. But I would just try to, summarize in bullet points or something, what you're hearing from the family. And then clicking this next button acts as a save button. So just you can navigate two ways through this. You can either click on each section using this navigation bar here, but I recommend you click next. Because let's say that you're in someone's home and their Wi-Fi goes out, anything that you have done before you clicked next will be saved. So that's also like a save button. Now you'll notice if I click next, it just takes me straight to the next section of questions. But I will point out that if you scroll up the page, you have all of the other, options, such as marking as complete. And here's where I'll show you how I can toggle directly from English into, for example, Spanish. So just right here on the page, I now have all of my prompts in Spanish, my questions in Spanish, and the answer choices in Spanish. So that's pretty handy. I'm just going to stay on this page and flip it back to English. Because what we're doing now after that opening question about let's get started, so we'll now get going on this first section that has an closed-ended question, families engaged in transitions. All right, so I would say, thank you for sharing your story. I'll now read you statements on different topics and ask you to how much you agree with each statement. So throughout the interview, there will be a chance for you to share your thoughts about the topic in your own words. These first statements are about when you started with the program and about getting your child ready to enter school. Please tell me how much you agree with each statement. The options are not at all, not very much, somewhat, mostly, or very much. So when we get into these closed-ended questions, we're going to want to repeat those answer choices over and over, at least for the first few sets of questions. Or, again, we have our visual response scale that may come in handy. So if you're visiting in person, you may want to print this out and bring this with you, or you could email it to the family ahead of time, for example. So, okay, tell me how much you would agree with this statement. When I started with the program, the staff tried to learn about my family's interests and concerns. Would you say not at all, not very much, somewhat, mostly, or very much? Let's just say they said mostly. Okay. Now, each section, again, I'll repeat, has an open-ended question, so they can, once you sort of start to jog their thinking around a certain area, they may have more to tell you. So, okay, well, please tell me more about how the program worked with you specifically when you started. So I'm going to click next, and now we're going to get into much deeper areas where you're going to start to see the coupleted questions. So I would just say, the next questions are about your relationship with your child and how our program may have contributed to it. Again, let's repeat the answer choices. So how much would you agree with the following statements? The options are, Now, Bob pointed out, we have these coupleted questions. So it's really important because a lot of families may say, you're asking me the same question twice, and that it's important for you to help them understand that we're asking just about how they feel about, how things are going. So how much would you agree with this statement? I have daily routines with my child. Okay, well, following up on that, how much would you agree with this statement? The program helped me create daily routines with my child. So what you may find, a variety of responses here. They also have the option to refuse a question or leave it blank, essentially. You can leave these questions blank, by the way, if they just don't know how to answer. It just won't fold into the data. So let's say that they say, oh, gosh, I'm not doing really well with daily routines with my child. And then they may actually say the program has helped me create daily routines very much. They may say, we hadn't really thought about this before. The program's helping me, just not there yet. They may say that, we have great daily routines, but the program didn't really help me do that. We already knew how to do that. So, what we want to do is elicit really honest responses. Now, this response would not reflect poorly on the program. Sometimes families just didn't need that help in the first place, right? But what you're going to probably find is when we look at the average scores, people are tending to rate their programs pretty highly, and that could be because they don't want to sort of tell you to your face that things aren't going well. But don't take it as a slight. For example, if they say the program didn't help me with this, I just knew how to do it myself. So a few more sets of questions here. So I know how to help my child meet and play with other children. How much would you agree with this statement? Not at all, not very much, somewhat, mostly, very much. The program has provided me with ideas about how to help my child meet and play with other children. I am gaining new knowledge and skills about parenting. And then following up on that, the program has helped me gain new knowledge and skills about parenting. So again, you can remind them as you're going through that we're talking about our relationships between the parent and the children. And then we have the, closing question at this section. Okay, so now please tell me more about how the program has affected how you and your child communicate. Again, if they, you want to dig a little bit deeper, we would follow up with a secondary prompt. How has the program changed the way you and your child talk and spend time together? So a few more sections here. We've got families as lifelong learners and advocates and leaders. So here's the question about, I set aside time to read with my child. I am learning how to speak up for my child's educational needs. And then the closing of this section is, tell me more about how the program has affected your involvement in your child's education. All right, so let's just quickly go through some of these sections so I can show you the reports. We've got our family growth and stability. We've got our health and nutrition. And then wrapping up this entire conversation is really about the program. So, I trust the program to help my child grow and learn. The program tries to meet my family's needs. And then the last two sections are just open-ended questions. So what could the program do differently to better help you and your family? And then the last question is simply, is there anything else you would like me to know about your experiences with the program? So after that's done, you could mark this as complete, or you could leave it as incomplete if you knew you wanted to go back and fill in some of the details. So that is the interview in a nutshell. I am going to check on the questions before I jump into the reports. So let's see here. This is a good one. Linda, thank you. What happens if a family refuses to cooperate? What I would recommend is, creating the interview form and then simply going through the closed-ended questions. Let me get back to a section here. And I would actually just go ahead and mark refused for all of them. That way you have a record that you attempted to, talk to them and engage. So that would be my recommendation. Another question here. When you do post-interviews, is it okay to remind parents how they responded in the pre-survey? That is a tough question, Stephanie. I'm not actually sure. I guess so. I mean, if you have the historical record in front of you, that just might be a lot of toggling back and forth, or I guess if you have the paper printout in front of you. For example, if their agreement dropped significantly. So, for example, I have daily routines with my child. If all of a sudden, if last time they said very much and this time they said not at all, you may want to dig a little bit deeper into that and say, well, it looks like something changed. Can you tell me more about that? So I wouldn't, I don't know sort of based on research and if it's scientifically valid, I don't think you'd want to tell them last time you said this, now what's your answer? But if there's a specific point that you, it raises your eyebrows, maybe it would be good to say, I recall, last time this seemed to be going well and this time there's been a change. So, or I guess on the flip side, if the first time they said we're not, not at all, and now they're doing it, somewhat or very much, you could say, cool, what change happened? Was there a resource that we provided for you? So I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea to sort of review the historical interview and have a few things in mind and just sort of notice things that have either significantly improved or significantly dropped. So that was a good question. So another question I have here, is this mandatory to complete for every family? That depends on your program. There are definitely programs who only pick 50% of their families to talk to. And then, as the question before, if a family refuses, obviously, we're not going to pressure them on this. But I do know that a lot of programs are not interviewing every single family simply because their enrollment numbers are so high that they can't get to all, 1,200 families. So talk to your program administrators about that. And if you need me to point you to that person, you can respond to the email I'll send out and we can point you to the right person. Okay, so I did have a response from, I believe, one of our administrators. Why would you remind parents about their previous responses? I think the validity would definitely be compromised if you did. So I kind of agree with that, Michelle. I wouldn't remind them of their responses for every single question, but if I did have at the top of my mind that there was an area that we really wanted to work on supporting them, and then all of a sudden their response really jumped up, we could maybe dig in. We could say, oh, that's great. It sounds like things are going really well here. compared to the last time we spoke, what changed? So yeah, I agree. You don't want to go through every question and say, last time you said this time you said that. But if it does spark some sort of a conversation about, major changes and how they're feeling in their lives, I don't think it would hurt to say, that this is a great improvement, or, did something happen, and how can we help you here? Okay, so those are all the questions for right now. I am going to jump into the reports. So within the reporting module, we have two options. One is a baseline report and one is a growth report. The baseline report is going to allow you to look at one snapshot in time. So for example, if I just wanted to look at my mid-year interviews between, August 1st of one year and July 31st of the next year, I could do that. I could just pick a date range. I could pick just one of my program types. So if I wanted to look at the average scores from an early Head Start program, for this school year, if I wanted to look at just one of my centers' average scores, I could do that. So again, these filters are not all visible on the screen by default. So you would want to hover your mouse over the pane here and scroll down. So you can actually slice and dice this data by so many different factors. So I could find, only my center-based families who speak Spanish, and then compare those numbers to, say, my home-based families who speak Spanish. I could compare my center-based families who speak Spanish with center-based families who speak English. I can look at my families who have children with disabilities. I can find the results of just one child, for example, or one guardian, and I can find the results from just the interviews, like possibly that I have conducted. So again, you can stack all these filters to find exactly what you're looking for. And what you're going to see on this page are average scores from the closed-ended questions. So we have our parent-focused questions. These are the sort of I statements. And then we have our program-focused questions, which are the statements that start with the program. So we have translated the agreement responses, not at all equals 1, very much equals 5. So you'll see here, if I'm looking at the average responses for any question and I see that there's a 4.8, when I started with the program, the staff tried to learn about my family's interests and concerns. That's a good score. That's like between mostly and very much, close to very much. Now, if I look at a question like this, the program has provided activities that help me get my child ready for school, and I see a 2.6. That's not very much to somewhat. So this may be an area for your center, site, classroom, school to focus on. So, okay, our families are probably looking for more activities to prepare their child for school. So you can see these average scores. Now I'm going to jump into the growth report to just show you that you can actually look, you can compare 2 points in time. So you would select these by the evaluation period. So I'm going to go ahead back to our historical data here and look at the middle of a year compared to the end of a year. Maybe we learned some things in the mid-year conversations, and then we maybe provided additional resources, or we had additional programming, maybe, parent meetings and opportunities for parents to meet each other. And then you can see if whatever changes you've made have turned the dials. So you have all of the same filters here with the growth report. Again, you hover over and you can scroll down. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at just the 2 evaluation periods. I'm only seeing the data from the centers that I have access to. Just a reminder. Your program administrator can see data from across all of the centers in your program. And then here at NHSA, of course, we can view the aggregate data, and we put out reports once a year showing sort of national averages. Okay, so what I'm looking at here now is I'm comparing the middle of the year to the end of the year, of course, historical data, but I'm looking at 119 mid-year interviews compared to 47 mid-year interviews. So now I see 4 gauges here, of course, the parent-focused questions and the program-focused questions for both of our time periods. What I'll also see are the average scores side by side for each question for each period that I'm looking at. If there's been a really good positive change, you'll have a green up arrow. If there's been some sort of significant downturn in the average responses, then you'll see a downward red arrow. Now, again, what we're going to want to probably celebrate are really high scores. So if people are saying, yeah, this is awesome, this is going really well, those are stories that we can tell other people or we can be, excited about. But then probably what we're going to want to focus our energy on are places where we see areas for opportunity. So for example, here, the program helps me understand how my child's disability affects their development. So we had a 2.78 in the middle of the year here. So again, that translates into only not very much or somewhat. But we didn't really improve upon that in the months in between these conversations. So that's something we'll probably want to look into more. As Bob showed you earlier on, one of the most powerful tools in ParentGauge is actually drilling down into these areas and looking at who responded in which way. So for example, here I'm going to go and reset my filters just for this one question. And I'm looking at 155 responses. This is essentially between August 1st, 2017 and today, but, I would narrow this down. And I can see, okay, well, 15 families said, they very much understood how their child's disability affects their development. But I had 40 families telling me not really, and 21 saying not at all. So I can click on these answer responses and see exactly who gave me that response. So if I click on not at all, I'm now going to have a list of those 21 families that said not at all. So I can make sure to follow up with all of them and make sure, how can we better support you? So that's one really important thing about ParentGauge is also thinking about what you learn immediately in the conversation and who needs to know that. So if there's a resource at your center or your site that you think should be connected to this family, just think about who may need to hear either our success stories or our areas that we're concerned about. Now, before I forget, really quickly, I'm going to go back to the growth report. I want to point out that you can print out all of the raw data. So there is a download option right here, and that's going to generate an Excel spreadsheet of anything, however you've applied the filters. It's going to give you a spreadsheet of that data. So I have one here that's already, I don't want to do that one. I have to switch my screen again, but I want to show you one that I have generated just so I can help you understand it. And I know we only have about 2 minutes left, but let me just show you. If you click that download button, you're going to get a spreadsheet of all of the raw data. So each row represents one interview. It has, of course, the dates, the guardian's name, any of the demographic information you have about the guardian, of course, the child's name. But then if you keep scrolling over to the right, you actually have your raw scores for each question. If you keep scrolling past that, you have your open-ended question responses even further down. Now, you may be wondering, what do these numbers mean? Why am I seeing negative numbers? There's a second tab on this spreadsheet called Labels, and that is going to translate, first of all, what the questions are, and then also what these numbers mean. So if you see, for example, a -4, it was just left empty. -3, skipped conditional. That's, for example, the child didn't have a disability, so that question wasn't even asked. So thank you again, everyone, for your time today, and I hope you have a happy new year.